Welcome to the Partial Historians.
We explore all the details of ancient Rome.
Everything from political scandals, the love affairs, the battles waged, and when citizens turn against each other. I'm Dr. Rad.
And I'm Dr. G. We consider Rome as the Romans saw it, by reading different authors from the ancient past and comparing their stories.
Join us as we trace the journey of Rome from the founding of the city. Welcome to a brand new episode of The Partial Historians. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Rad.
And I am Dr. G.
Welcome, Dr. G. I feel like listeners will have no idea how hard we have fought to get to our microphones today.
Oh, dear listeners, we've been experiencing some audio issues.
We still are experiencing some audio issues.
Suffice it to say that we are podcasting in separate rooms of the same house.
And I am standing, which is very strange.
Think of the vocal projection.
And I can't hear myself, so this is going to be really interesting.
So we have been tracing Rome's history from the founding of the city. And this is a very exciting episode for us because we officially tip into the 4th century BCE.
That we do. And to do a quick recap of where we were in 400 BCE, the tipping point, if you will, the main thing that we were excited about was the fact that there was a plebeian elected to the supreme magistracy of Rome, the military tribune with consular power.
Such a breakthrough. And I think if I recall rightly, and maybe I don't, there was more than one.
No. You are 100% wrong on that.
Well, there you go, folks. Even historians don't remember things properly. That's why it's always good to check your sources.
Yes. But yes, we had one who was elected and everyone was like, this isn't too bad. The world didn't collapse on itself. And the other thing I think to note in terms of background, we've been talking about this for a few episodes actually, but I feel it will be relevant to my narrative today. Rome is at war with Veii, an Etruscan city to the north.
Yeah, this has been happening for a little while now, and we must be, a good ways into what is going to be this 10-year siege.
Yes, we're getting ever closer, Dr. G, to the end of the siege.
Inching towards the end of the siege.
We are. So that's a recap. If you want a more detailed one, we actually just did a massive episode where we recapped the entire 5th century.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah. But otherwise, I'm ready, Dr. G. Let's go into 399 BCE.
It's 399 BCE.
How's your source material looking, Dr. G?
Oh, I have source material.
Really?
Oh, I'm so excited.
Okay. Well, you know what? Just in case it's not as good as you think, I'm going to let you do the magistracies because I feel like that's just become your thing now.
That's a little bit of an ouch from the old Livy lover over here.
Nothing against you personally. It's just Dionysius has been gone for a while now.
I know, but we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So we start the year with military tribunes with consular power.
We do.
Super important. And there is 6 of them. And I hate to break it to you, I did just go back and do a quick re-look at 400. And at least from my sources' perspective, there was more than one plebeian as military tribune with consular power in 400. Now, we could be quibbling about names, but definitely this year, we seem to have a whole spate of plebeians in the role.
Well, way to go and spoil my fun, Dr. G. I was going to surprise you with the fact that Livy tells me explicitly that there is only one patrician elected to be military tribune with consular power in this year.
Oh, yeah. The old Marcus Veturius Crassus Cicerorinus.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah.
Or Cicerorinus.
That's the one.
Yeah, that guy. He's
Yep.
going to stand out. So this guy, this one sole patrician this year, is surrounded by a whole bunch of really interesting different folk who do not seem to have patrician names. So we've got, first of all, Gnaeus Ganucius Augurinus. Mm-hmm. We have Lucius Attilius Priscus.
Yep.
Both of these guys, first time in the role. Not a surprise when you're not a
Well,
patrician.
yeah, I could have told you that.
Marcus Pomponius Rufus. Doesn't seem to be a patrician either.
No.
Gnaeus or Gaius. There seems to be some dispute about the praenomen with this guy. Duilius Longus.
I feel like I've heard that family name before.
Duilius.
Plebeian though it may be.
Yeah, I think it has come up. It rolls off the tongue nicely, which means I must have pronounced it before.
Exactly.
And finally, we have Valero Publius Philo.
Okay.
So all of these guys, all 5 of these non-patrician military tribunes, first time in the role, fresh cabs off the rank. I think we're in that point where, in terms of the siege of Veii, people are looking for new strategies and innovation.
Look, possibly, but I find it kind of amusing that, according to Livy at least, it has taken several decades to get to the point where people finally felt comfortable enough to elect a plebeian to be military tribune with consular power. And now that they've had 1 year with one guy, they're like, we're all in. Let's make it plebeian all the time.
Turns out they're great.
Exactly. I find that quite hilarious.
They just had to try it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Now they're like, oh my God.
It's really opened a door for them, and now they're getting experimental.
Exactly, yeah. All right, so apart from the fact that we have so many plebeians in office, the first thing that Livy tells me about 399 is that there had been a terrible winter the year before, which I think I did mention, and now in 399, it's an incredibly hot summer.
Ooh.
Yes.
Oh, a hot Roman summer.
That's right. I actually quite like the translation, so I'm going to read it out to you. It is noxious and baleful to all living creatures.
Oh, God.
Doesn't sound great.
Oh, look, I mean, I was in Rome last year and it was pretty hot. It was a 6-week heat wave, so maybe they had one of those.
I feel like they did. So naturally, if you have a terrible winter and then a really awful summer, it gets you wondering, Dr. G, have I offended the gods?
Is climate change on the horizon?
Exactly. What have we been doing? You know, I mean, Rome does become an industrial powerhouse, but I feel like we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves with that one. It's probably more likely that they've offended the gods.
Yeah, our chances are.
Yeah. So as a result, they're looking around. They're going, what did we do? I can't figure it out. And so they turn to their old trusty failsafe, the Sibylline Books.
Yeah, okay. So the Sibylline Books, just to sort of recap a little bit on that, we think that they turned up in Rome in the time of the kings and were sadly mostly destroyed through hubris. And the few books that are remaining are now safely guarded and taken care of and consulted in times of trouble. Now, you could also go and see the Sibylline Oracle directly, but there's also the books.
Exactly. They decide to go for the books. Easier option.
Yeah. You never know if she's going to be available.
Exactly. Now, we have actually mentioned this before. It seems like there are some guys who are kind of in charge of the books or stuff relating to the books called the duumvirs. They've come up before, I believe. Now, those of you who studied places like Pompeii will know that a duumvir is the head magistrate in like a smaller town like Pompeii. But in this case, we're not really talking about that exactly. Duumvir just literally means like the 2 men.
Yeah, the 2 men who are looking after those books.
Exactly. So they decide that what they need to do is hold a new religious ceremony. Now, I'm building up to this because I'm not entirely confident that my tongue's going to get around it. The Lectisternium.
Oh, yes. Oh, look, you and I, our sources are in sync in some respects.
Okay. So apparently it's the first one that was ever held in Rome, and it goes for 8 days. And there are sacrifices to Apollo, Latona, Diana, Hercules, Mercury, and Neptune. Now, listeners might be wondering, well, what is involved in this exactly? Apparently, the name comes from the idea that there are couches involved and food spread out for the gods, because essentially the Romans put out some couches, put down some images of the gods on those couches, and spread out a nice little banquet for them.
A delicious divine feast.
Exactly. They are invited to partake in this sacrificial feast, basically. We think it comes from Greek origins, the Romans being influenced by the Greeks, because they have something kind of similar. I think the Greek versions are called the theoxenia, which is, again, basically a banquet for the gods with their images spread out on couches and stuff.
It's a delightful image. And I wonder if this might be a good time to take you a little bit through what I have of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, because framing up the context for this whole situation, I think, is really important.
Yeah, no, please tell me.
So Dionysius of Halicarnassus does not agree with Livy.
Oh, okay, fine.
Sadly.
I thought you just said we were in sync.
Well, in the sense that we've got severe weather on the cards.
Oh, okay.
But we have very different types of severe weather being put forward in this case.
Let me guess. It was a great winter and then an even better summer.
It was a very severe snowstorm.
Okay.
And the snow apparently was higher than 7 Roman feet. So we're talking like an epic snowfall.
Yeah, they'd be trapped in your house with that.
Oh, not only that, your house would collapse.
Oh, well, that's even worse than I imagined.
It's disastrous. So a Roman foot is about 29 centimeters, or about, I think, what does that make it? Maybe a foot, a modern foot. A Roman foot and a modern foot might be similar in length. And so we're looking at a depth of over 2 meters worth of snow, or about 6 foot, 9.5 inches of snow, at least. And think about Rome and its situation on some small hills, but mostly surrounded by plains. This is a very unlikely geographic location for such a high level of snowfall.
Sure.
And it is reported to be completely unprecedented, either in source material before or records afterwards, at least down to the time of Dionysius of Halicarnassus. So they talk about this as like an exceptionally terrible snow event. And the consequences of this are massive, because with this much snow, you basically have issues with your herds. Cattle die from frostbite and things like this. The fruit trees, which might be starting to put on new growth, basically wither up and don't produce anything for years to come. They have to recover from that. People think those fruit trees are dead.
My God.
Yep. And when the snow melts, it's so heavy that it actually breaks structures. So there's this massive issue. And to compensate for this, the idea of putting forward a lectisternium under these conditions, so some sort of banquet with sacrifices to the gods, when actually the township of Rome itself must be on the brink of famine, and under pretty severe disaster circumstances already. The idea that they're giving what little they have left to the gods in order to try and rectify this situation, I think speaks remarkably to how strongly the Romans feel about their relationship with the gods and how they have to manage that, and how shocking this whole moment must have been for them to be like, oh, we really need to do something different in terms of our ritual practice in order to compensate for whatever is going on here, because this was outstandingly terrible.
Wow, that's so sad. I didn't think about the fact that they're offering food to the gods and they probably have almost none.
Yeah. So sad.
I know. Well, apparently when we see the lectisternium showing up in early Rome, it is often in connection to things like pestilence. So, and we've talked before about how these environmental issues can obviously lead to wider issues with food supply and general health. They're obviously trying to tick all the boxes because they are including most of the major gods I could think about.
So those connections of these gods seem really important as well. So Apollo has a connection with healing, divination, music.
Exactly.
Also has an Etruscan legacy as well. So he was well known throughout the region, not just from a Greek perspective. Latona is the goddess of the night. And so she is often considered to be synchronous with Leto,
Okay.
also known in the Etruscan. And obviously Diana and Apollo have a bit of a thing.
Dirty Diana.
Exactly. So this idea that there is a whole range of these gods involved, including Mercury, bringer of culture, relationships with the shepherds. Maybe you're trying to get something right with the herds here.
And also maybe trade, getting supplies, resources, making sure they're not, totally cut off.
Yeah, and this connection with trade might also feed into the connection with Hercules, who's also associated with cattle breeding and trading and things like that.
True.
And then we also have Neptune. Now, why Neptune is involved might just be because of the melting snow, because otherwise I'm not sure why he's there.
Well, again, if we go back to trade, how do you trade? By ship.
Oh, yeah, it's the fastest way to travel.
Exactly. So it could be that, but who really knows? They don't spell it out for us, unfortunately.
That's true. Now, what is interesting in Dionysius's account, because we've only got a fragment.
Better than nothing.
It's better than... I've got something to talk about, Dr. Rad. He mentions a source on this referring to a guy called Piso, who is an ex-censor who wrote a series called the Annales, which is, off the face of it, doesn't sound particularly unique. Writing Annales is the sort of thing that anybody who's anybody likes to do. Both Livy and Dionysius or Halicarnassus are essentially writing Annales, a year-by-year account of things.
And it's essentially what you and I are doing, Dr. G.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're not unique either. Oh, no.
No, but, we're anybody who's anybody. That's a good thing.
Oh, that's true. We're in a illustrious category.
Exactly.
Now, this is a reference to somebody who we do know, a guy called Lucius Calpurnius Piso Frugi. Now, he was a Roman senator and a historian in the 2nd century BCE. Mm-hmm. Tribune of the plebs in 149, consul in 133, and then censor in 120. Now, the reason why it's worth mentioning those dates is because he's very much tied up in the whole situation with the Gracchi later on.
Oh, okay.
So it's interesting that we're starting to see callbacks to writers that are very much invested in things to do with the agrarian crisis that then is also placed back in time into this 4th and 5th century period as well.
Absolutely. Now, Livy does go a little bit crazy, Dr. G.
Uh-oh.
Apparently, because Piso, the original source, might have added on a bit of extra detail. And this apparently is something that Dionysius, your friend, tells us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Dionysius has some beautiful detail from Piso.
Yes, and so he says how it wasn't just the gods having a fun old time. It was everybody in Rome because they were just opening the doors. They were throwing open their homes and saying, come on in, join my party. Doesn't matter if I know you, doesn't matter if I don't. And it was time to make up with people you might have been fighting with, and you weren't allowed to start any new fights. You weren't allowed to start any lawsuits. Prisoners were released forever, it seems, because the gods seemed to be smiling down upon them.
Are you saying that Livy doesn't believe this?
I think Livy does believe this.
Amazing.
I think it's Dionysius who mentions that this was something that Piso talked about.
Yeah, he does. But he doesn't dismiss it. He just sort of recounts it.
It's the academic that's dismissive. I think they're looking at all the other lectisternium and saying, this doesn't happen.
Oh, come on, guys.
I know. There's no party vibe. There's no block party.
Let Piso have his moment in the sun.
We're shutting it right
He
down.
wants to call back to some beautiful, glorious, golden era of Rome. The proper republic where things were done right.
Well, look, I think that Livy went even further than Piso.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think that's what the academics are assuming, that Piso added a little bit of extra detail, and then Livy was like, you know what? I'll take your extra detail and add some.
Okay, well, that's very interesting because it does seem like it's a time of severe crisis, and perhaps a proportionate reaction to crisis is to really lean into, in a sort of nihilistic, fatalistic kind of way, lean into life itself and celebrate the fact that you've survived. So to me, this level of excess where it's like freeing of slaves and everybody's partying at everybody's house doesn't necessarily sound unlikely given the severity of the circumstances. So if we buy into it's been a really severe natural disaster, and it sounds like we've had a couple of those in recent years as well, that on the back of some other weather conditions and potentially on the back of a really hot summer, they've now got this really severe winter, that people are kind of open to embracing the fact that they've gotten through this. And maybe that's led to some hedonistic behavior.
Look, I'm not entirely discounting the partying. I think it's specifically the freeing of prisoners.
Yeah, nobody would ever do that.
Yeah, that's like, I'm not really sure about that. And also, yeah, the idea that it was also like a gigantic block party. It might be a time when people are, putting aside their grudges and that kind of thing. But whether it was, like Rome is just having, one big old shindig, it's like, well, maybe not. Now, Dr. G, if that's all we have to say about this banquet for the gods, I've got something else for you that's heating up just like this horrible, horrible summer.
Uh-oh. What is it?
It's the war with Veii.
Oh, no. Is it still happening?
It's definitely still happening.
Oh, that siege. When's it ever going to end?
I know. The Romans are tinkering around with their siege equipment, I don't really know anything about construction, so I'm going to imagine they're tightening something. Tightening some lug nuts. No idea what that is.
Covering the rocks that they're about to throw with a little bit of animal feces to make them less pleasant when they hit the target.
Exactly. Writing insulting messages on the rocks.
Exactly.
Yes. Where all of a sudden they're attacked from different sides by the people that have joined Veii, the Capanates and the Faliscans. As well as Veii.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So Veii does have some allies. These are the people, if I recall rightly, that are slightly further north who realize if Veii falls, it's the domino effect that they're worried about.
They have twigged. Yes, that's right. That's exactly what's happening. Now, this has happened before because when they first realized that, we know that the Romans got caught in a very unpleasant sandwich between their enemies, and it didn't go well for them. However, that was, of course, entirely down to their poor leadership.
I was going to say, yeah. The I'm not coming to help you unless you ask. And it's like, well, I'm not asking.
This time, they learnt from history. An example of someone learning from history. Can you believe it?
It's possible, my friends.
It's possible. Yeah. So, as a result, when the Romans found themselves once again penned in, help was immediately sent from the main camp. And the backups were also able to assault the Capanates from behind. Bit of their own medicine.
Ooh.
The Faliscans were naturally terrified by this sudden attack, and the Romans decided to really push this advantage home. And with a sally, they finally sent them running away. And the Romans didn't let up there. They continued to follow them as they ran screaming in the other direction, slaughtering them left, right, and centre.
Oh, I suppose it's war. I mean, that's unpleasant, though.
I think we're on the Roman side here, so I think we're supposed to be happy about that.
Yay.
Then some Romans also decide, why not raid some territory of the Capanates?
Well, as you do, naturally, since you're there.
Exactly. And whilst they were doing that, they happened to run into the army who was chasing after the Faliscans, and so they join in killing the surviving Faliscans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The people from Veii take a look around at this situation and say, you know what? We might just go back into the city.
You know what? This siege is fine. I'm going to live inside the walls.
Thanks for the help, guys. But you know what? I'm a bit tired. I think I might just go back behind the walls.
I'm going to retire to my chambers and think about my future with the Roman camp outside.
Exactly. Unfortunately, of course, they naturally, whilst they were fighting the Romans, had the gates to the city closed so that the Romans couldn't just run into the city.
That's very clever.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what this means is the people who decide to retreat are trapped.
Oh, no.
I better say that again because I just hit the microphone with my nose. They are trapped.
Oh, no.
And unfortunately, many of them are also killed before they manage to get inside.
Oh, okay. This sounds like it's a pretty stellar win for the Roman forces. It doesn't sound like they've broken the siege at all, but they've really put a dent in morale and confidence of the enemy.
Yeah, it's that slow drip of psychological terror. Yes.
With neighbors like these, who needs enemies?
Exactly. And the reasons why the people of Veii were slow to let the soldiers in is, of course, they didn't want the Romans to penetrate their city. So they were very slow about opening the gates.
Wow. I can only imagine the sort of horrified conversations that would have happened inside the walls because people are basically locking out their own relations and then watching them get slaughtered.
Yeah, they're saying, really sorry, guys. We know that you're tired. We know that you want a nap, but we just can't risk it. Now, that's basically all I get about the war with Veii for 399. But if we switch our attention back to the city itself, it's time for some more elections, Dr. G.
Ooh, elections. Oh, that's exciting.
Getting ready for next year. Now, naturally, the patricians are not at all happy at this situation where there are more plebeians in power than patricians. Outrageous.
Not only that, it sounds like the plebeians, as military tribunes with consular power, have had some real military breakthroughs. Like, they have just run down the enemy in a couple of different directions and penned some of the Venetians, or the Veianates, I should say. Venetians will make us confused about Venezia. We shouldn't do that.
And blinds, yeah.
Yeah, the people of Veii trapped on the outside of their own walls. So it seems like they're doing okay without the patrician leadership in the top position.
But notice that there are no named commanders in any of that.
Well, is that because the patricians who write down history would never deign to give them any credit?
I'm entirely in agreement with you. Now, the reason why they have a problem, of course, is that they thought this whole situation was meant to be about sharing power, because sharing is caring. But the plebeians are being so greedy, taking over all the offices. It's like they're running the state.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to look at the previous year and the way that they've all been stacked with patricians to then be like, you know what is fair?
Fair is when the patricians get their way. I thought that was very clear.
Boo.
Yeah. So the patricians decide, all right, guys, we can't be sleeping on this one. We've got to really put our best fancily shoed foot forward. Mm-hmm. And they therefore select the absolute best candidates that they have on offer. And the plebeians could not resist. They were just so sexy and so arrogant.
Have you seen the way he lifts his toga above his knee?
And they started campaigning for the patricians as though it was actually a plebeian candidate, because they're idiots, of course. Teamwork equals dreamwork, guys. So disappointing.
I'm unhappy about this turn of events.
I know. Plebeians are fools. Now, naturally, there's probably also something going on here with the whole religious angle. A terrible winter.
Yep.
Pestilence, which was just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Summer. The gods are upset. Mm-hmm. Plague is clearly coming after all of this stuff. The Sibylline Books indicated as much. And we can link it all back to the fact that there were plebeians in office.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's the explanation.
That's the explanation. I mean, everything's been completely fine. There has never been a plague or a pestilence while patricians were in charge.
Yeah. I mean, who would be surprised at this turn of events? As soon as you put plebeians in power, what do you got? Disaster. That's what you got.
That's
now
exactly
the gods
it.
are unhappy.
Yeah. Well, that's what the patricians have been saying all this time, haven't they, Dr. G? They were like...
It's true. I mean, at least they're consistent.
Yeah. That's why they didn't want them to have the consulship. They're like, we can't. It's too risky. Sacred. And now look what's happened. We gave you something else. And even then, you screwed it up. For everybody.
The gods are so disappointed in us that we're just going to have to go back to having some patricians in power.
That's pretty much it. So the plebeians are basically fainting in the streets, going, oh my God, their blood, it's just so blue. I can't concentrate. And they were also really scared that something much worse was coming their way because the gods were clearly ticked off with them. And so all patricians were elected for the following year. And that is all I have from Livy today.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
Well, so there is some nice synergy, I think, between Livy's account and what Dionysius of Halicarnassus are bringing to the table. Admittedly, we've only got a fragment of Dionysius. And the idea of there being like the terrible summer versus the terrible snowstorm seems like, minor details. But maybe they had both. That would explain some of the tragedy here.
I think we can all agree we're not going to time travel back to 399.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think I want to experience that weather system. Whatever was going on there was a bit of a problem. So this...
'Cause tonight we're gonna party like it's 399.
I mean, I'm happy to follow Paizo on this. I mean, like, let people have some fun for a change. Like, why would that have to be wrong? I mean, come on. Admittedly, I haven't delved into the scholarship on this, but I'm sure people have very good reasons why they want Rome to be a more grumpy place than it currently is.
Well, I don't think they're denying the celebration or anything. I think they're just questioning whether it was quite as extreme as Livy points out.
Would you really free people? Would you really just let anybody into your house?
It kind of seems like a recipe for disaster that when things are going badly, you're like, I know, let's let the criminals loose in the street.
Well, it's not even that they're criminals necessarily. At least in the account that we get from Dionysius, it's slaves being manumitted. It's...
Really? I was wondering why you said slaves earlier. Okay, interesting.
It's not necessarily criminals at all, unless you consider that debt bondage could be one of the ways that you end up enslaved, which is possible and is considered a crime, but is a crime of circumstance, not a crime that you really go out of your way to commit.
Talk about criminalizing the poor, Dr. G.
Yeah, exactly. We see it all in Rome. Whatever you've thought about today, we've seen it in Rome. So we've got this lectisternium, and that is apparently the direct response to the Sibylline oracles, suggesting like this is the course of action to take.
Correct.
So that's the Greek connection that you're talking about as well.
Yep.
So this idea that they're borrowing from Greek ritual rites in order to see if that will make a difference in this case. The idea that the couches of the gods are sacred is really important. So one of the things that we understand about the way the Romans were practicing religion in this period is that if you had a temple, and there would have been very few at this point in time, but the structures that you built to house statues of the gods weren't the only part of the building that was very important. The couch itself, where the statue would sit, was also considered to be quite sacred. So this is a sacred banquet of sorts because the couches involved have been consecrated in the same way that the buildings have been consecrated. So I think that's an interesting detail that comes out through this as well. I think the choice of the gods is really interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it, but there are some figures here that we haven't really encountered very much before. But
I think it's all guesswork, to be honest.
Well,
I mean, we know the names and people have suggested, well, maybe it's because of this, maybe it's because of that. But we don't have anyone saying it's because of this.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
But it does give us a sense that the divine landscape that the Romans are operating in is broader than what we've previously really encountered in our written source material. Like, we do know that there is a whole series of indigent Latin gods and sort of italic gods, and they sometimes start to morph into these Greek figures that then become Roman figures. And this is already well happening by the time that we get to 399. So things like Apollo and Diana, Hercules, Mercury, Neptune, these are all very familiar from a different context, cultural context. And maybe that's part of the connection here as well, is that they're taking from Greek rites, but they're also prioritizing gods of their own that have a syncretism and overlap with Greek gods as well.
All right, Dr. G. Well, with that being said, I think it's time for the partial pick. That's right, listeners. This is the part of the episode where we get to rate Rome's performance. How do we do it, Dr. G?
Well, there is a potential for Rome to win 50 golden eagles. So, first of all, we have the 5 categories. They can score up to 10 in each category, and we will see how they go.
All right, what's our first category, Dr. G?
Military clout.
Okay, I think we have something to work with here.
Do we?
Excuse me, they escaped from a very dangerous enemy embrace.
It sounds like they chased down people and murdered them.
After being attacked themselves.
Fine. I think in this sort of situation, obviously this siege has been going on for a while. This is by no means illegitimate war tactics as far as the Romans are concerned or their neighbours. If the situation had been reversed, we could almost guarantee that their neighbours would have behaved in the same way. I would say that this is probably a 5.
Yeah, I think it's a 5. It could have been bad. I mean, they could have been completely penned in and not able to break out, and they managed to do it. And not only that, they managed to scare the little pants off those guys.
Yeah, this does set things up for a poor morale outlook for Veii and their allies heading into the next campaign season.
This is true. All right, what's our next category, Dr. G?
Our second category is diplomacy.
Don't really think so.
I'm going to say 0.
Yeah. Nothing's happening on the outside and nothing's happening on the
I'm
inside.
not seeing any hints of diplomatic activity here.
Although, again, I would say, not their fault.
I mean, did they try?
Well, what are you supposed to do when you're being attacked? Make them a mixtape?
I mean, you could. These are some songs that remind me of you.
All right, let's move on. What's our next category?
Expansion.
No. They're trying, but no.
Yeah, they're not really gaining territory. They're doing some raiding, but it doesn't sound like they've secured anything. So that's a 0.
Yeah.
That leads us into virtus.
Unfortunately, even though they apparently did so well in the battle, we don't really have any moments that are singled out.
And because we don't have individual names attached to some of these military feats, we don't get a chance to really see virtus embodied. And the thing with virtus is it is about the person and the way that they're embodying manliness from a Roman perspective. So if you don't have a name attached to a commander or somebody in the field doing the thing, then we can't be sure about the virtus involved.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to our final category, Dr. G.
The citizen score. Was this a good time to be a Roman citizen, do you
I'm
think?
so torn for all the reasons we've discussed. There's a party, but it's a party because things are really bad.
It's a party for those who survived.
It's a party and everyone's invited. Oh,
Yeah, but you know, the cattle law died, so that's not great. It seems like the pestilence must be on the way.
But it's $3.99.
And I suppose...
Plebeians in power.
Oh, yeah, that might be the saving
Failing
grace
miserably.
I don't think they're failing miserably. Didn't they have huge military success?
I think I just told you that all of this disaster is because of them. So,
Oh, I see. Taking the patrician side, Naomi.
well, is there any other way to look at things?
Oh, okay. So the citizen score.
Yeah.
I'm focusing. Is there anything good here for citizens? And I think the fact that we've got 5 of the 6 military tribunes with consular power coming from the plebeians, and they perform well in the battlefield, despite what other propaganda might say about the failures of this year and the need for patrician leadership only.
It's not propaganda when it's the truth.
I think we can say maybe about a 3 or a 4 for citizen score, just because they've got some representation in there and the representation seems to go well.
That's true.
Otherwise, it's not a great time because obviously these natural disasters seem to be quite severe and are leading to flow-on consequences.
But the partying and the slaves
All right.
and the prisoners.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, it's like when you go to a wake at a funeral and it's like, sure.
Ouch. I don't know how the gods would feel about you characterizing their banquet in this way.
I'm just saying there are times
Guards,
there are
arrest
times
her.
where people come together and maybe it gets rowdy depending on the wake. It really depends, but it's a celebration through pain. And I think the same sort of situation is going on here.
Ancient Rome, smiling through the pain. $3.99 BCE.
Put that on the headstone.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be our next T-shirt. All right. Because it's not at all niche to have it pinned down to 1 year that
Of course
everyone
not.
else has forgotten. All right, so I agree with you. I would say, I think probably a 4.
Okay.
Okay, which means, Dr. G, we have ended up with a grand total of 9 golden eagles for Rome.
Oh, it didn't even crack double figures.
Were you really expecting more when there were plebeians in the majority for the first time?
No comment, really.
Yeah.
I feel like, the patricians can stick it up their ass.
Look, I kind of think of this like in Australia, the first time we had a female prime minister. It didn't go so great. And
Mostly because everybody decided that they really needed to be misogynistic all of a sudden.
I'm not denying that, but I'm just saying, when you're the first, I think sometimes things go badly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You got to feel for the guy from 400 then.
But hey, the good news is we're back to having all patricians all the time next year.
Yeah,
Hey.
Yay. Well, I look forward to seeing how poorly they do in power.
Me too. Secretly, me too. Don't tell them I said that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Partial Historians. You can find our sources, sound credits, and transcript in our show notes over at partialhistorians.com. We offer a huge thank you to you if you're one of our illustrious Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, we'd love your support in a way that works for you. Leaving a nice review really makes our day. We're on Ko-Fi for one-off or ongoing donations, or Patreon, of course. Our latest book, Your Cheeky Guide to the Roman Empire, is published through Ulysses Press. It is full of stories that the Romans probably don't want you to know about them. This book is packed with some of our favourite tales of the colourful history of ancient Rome. Treat yourself, or an open-minded friend, to Rome's glories, embarrassments, and most salacious claims with Your Cheeky Guide to the Roman Empire.